Let me say at the outset that I'm thrilled that this committee is going to move swiftly to address this issue. I have a couple of concerns that I will address this morning. But at the outset, let me say that before September 9th, I knew very little about this issue. I now feel like I have a PhD in it. I hardly knew about the National Transportation Safety Board. I knew nothing about PHMSA. I didn't know what a maximum operating pressure was. I didn't know what a PSI was, but I know all about all of those things today. I also know that I went to the funerals of 8 people in my district. I visited the burn center in San Francisco where 7 victims slept, hung to life for 4, 5, 6 months. This is a tragedy not just for the San Francisco Bay Area. This was a national story. It was an international story. And for as much as we are talking about today, there are a couple of things that are not in this bill that need to be addressed. One is, if you look at pipeline safety historically and the laws that we've put on the books, we grandfathered in all of the pipes that were pre-1970. So all of the older pipes are not subject to the kind of scrutiny that newer pipes are. This was a pipe that was actually placed in service in 1956. It's got lots of problems. The National Transportation Safety Board will come out with this report at the end of August. The welds appear to be flawed. The operator didn't know what was under the ground, thought it was a seamless pipe when in fact it was a seam pipe, didn't have the instrumentality to determine that the welds were poor, had maximum allowable operating pressures that exceeded what probably should have been used. But having said all of that, they followed the law. They followed the law because they were grandfathered in. Now, I've introduced legislation that addresses a number of these elements. The local operator in my community, Pacific Gas and Electric, has implemented every single measure that's in my bill. Now, they've done it for a lot of reasons, but they're looking at over $1 billion in liability right now. And for all the operators across the country, the kinds of steps that we're recommending, I think, are very important. One of the things that's not addressed in either bill is notice to the resident. PG&E has noticed everyone in their region if they're 2,000 feet from a transmission line. Now, that's important and good not just for the resident, but for the operator. If the homeowner doesn't know that they've got a transmission line in their backyard or front yard and they're putting up an in-law unit, they're not going to take the kinds of precautions necessary. And as we know in pipeline safety, most ruptures occur from third-party impact. So that's a very important feature. PG&E did it. They did it swiftly. It was not, I think, an extraordinary cost to them. It's notice to not only the resident, but it's also notice to the local first responders. The fire chief in San Bruno didn't even know there was a transmission line running through the middle of the street. Now, it took 1 hour and 30 minutes or more for PG&E to turn off the gas. Now, I'm passing out to you photographs. This photograph shows you the fireball 30 feet in the air or higher. They thought it was a plane that had crashed at first. But it took 1 hour and 30 minutes for them to turn off the gas because they had to go all the way to another community, get the keys to open the gate to get to the valves. If there are automatic and remote shut-off valves required in high-consequence areas, these are areas where you have high population and or seismic risk, that could have been turned off within 20 minutes at the very most. So the fire raged for 1.5 hours, taking lives and extensive property. Over 37 homes were demolished. And if you look at this, it looks like a war zone in many of these pictures. And this community is still trying to recover today. So I think it's very important for us to look at putting automatic and remote shutoff valves, not just on new construction. It's the most vulnerable construction that is pre-1970 that we should be concerned about, and we should be concerned about it in high consequence areas where there's high population, where population has grown up around transmission lines that were put in place many decades ago. It's no one's fault at this point. It's just that we've got to make it safe for the consumers, for the ratepayers. And I think as we look at what the costs are associated with it, I can tell you as one person who's witnessed this firsthand, if it means slightly more on my PG&E bill to make sure that there is going to be safety first, then I'm willing to pay that price to make sure that lives aren't lost. Now, I have a written statement that I am not going to spend much time on because I think that it kind of speaks for itself. But I do want you to appreciate that there has to be disclosure of the location of these pipelines to the first responders. If they don't know where they're located, if they're not trained, then they are sitting ducks when an explosion occurs. There has to be notice to the consumer that automatic and remote shutoff valves need to be put in place in high consequence areas. The language in both bills is really pretty squishy. It's basically, they need to use the best technology moving forward. Well, I'm much more concerned about the older pipelines than I am the newer pipelines. And for all those operators that have pipelines that they do not have paperwork for, and in 30% of PG&E's system, they do not have paperwork. They do not know what's under the ground. In those situations, that pipeline needs to be hydro tested because there's no way of knowing whether or not it's safe. There's a whole new technology around what's called smart pigging, but if you've got pipe diameter that ranges from 30 to 24 to 40, you're not going to be able to use smart pigging. So the only way to make sure that that is safe is to do the hydrostatic testing. None of that, frankly, is in the legislation today. So I urge my colleagues to recognize if these pictures don't speak 1,000 words, I don't know what does. This is not anything you want to have happen in your district. And when it does, it consumes you for years. And it has been a huge toll in my region and something that really needs to be addressed on a federal level. I yield back.